In a previous video, I talked about how to write a Dungeons & Dragons campaign as a whole, the big overarching campaign plot. But that plot will often consist of a lot of smaller individual stories, some of which may never really have a big impact on the long-term campaign story. While the big campaign story is fun, what your players will really enjoy session to session are the smaller, often quite self-contained stories. The quality of these smaller stories can sometimes make or break the campaign as a whole, and it can sometimes be harder to write a really good self-contained small story as opposed to that big campaign epic. There's a basic 5-step template that I use when I'm writing a quest, so I'll give you the template and then I'll take you through each step of the process. Here are the 5 steps of the template. Establishing the objective, initial challenge, main challenge, new information, final challenge. Now before we go further, I'm going to try to get out ahead of a common objection that I hear to using this kind of template. You shouldn't use a template because all of your adventures will start to feel the same. Now that would be true if the template produced the same kind of quest each time, but of course it doesn't. As you'll see later in the video, changing a few details at one step or another in the template will change the character of the template as a whole. With that out of the way, let's jump into the first step, establishing the objective. Your players need to do something, and the sooner they find out what that something is, the sooner they'll become engaged with the quest. This step is about giving your players 3 pieces of information: what needs to be done, why it needs to be done, and what happens if they succeed or fail. There are a few ways to do this, the simplest perhaps being the quest giver, who encounters the players and just gives them the quest. For example, the local mayor might approach the players when they arrive in a new town and ask them to take on a job that his own people aren't really capable of dealing with. Alternatively, and perhaps more organically, the players might stumble upon the start of the quest, a dead body, the aftermath of a monster attack, some strange phenomena, something that demands to be investigated. They might then seek someone out who can play the role of the mayor in the first example, who can then give them that extra information that they might need, perhaps a local witness or expert who can tell them about what they're dealing with. Now we get to the real meat of the quest. This step is about putting a challenge in front of your players that will need to be overcome before they can access the main challenge of the mission. For example, they might need to get information before they can progress. If the players are tasked with hunting down some bandits who've stolen an important artifact, they might need to go around the town and find out some information about where the bandits are hiding out and who they work with. This could involve roleplay, some bribery, persuasion, intimidation. This is the first small challenge to warm up to the bigger challenge. If the objective is to enter a castle and slay a bugbear chieftain, the players might have to first defeat a monster that lives in the tunnel they're using to sneak into the castle. In its simplest form, it could just be a journey that the players have to go on to reach the main challenge of the mission. For example, they have to go up to find the temple where the monster is hiding out, so they ascend into the mountains. It's a difficult climb, and along the way they have to do various survival checks, perhaps athletics to jump over a gap. Maybe there's some wolves attacking them as they're climbing the mountain trail. After that initial challenge, the players are ready to move on to the main event of the quest, fighting a monster, clearing bandits out of a cave. It'll usually involve combat. Although it doesn't have to. In one of my games, the first challenge involved infiltrating an exclusive party at the opening night of an art gallery. The second challenge was to convince a wealthy partygoer to take on their struggling artist friend and support them as their patron. This is really the simplest part of the template. It's the players doing the thing that they set out to do in step 1. And if things ended here, we'd have a decent little quest on our hands, but it would be a little bit predictable, and the players would feel that they kind of knew how it was always going to end from the start. That's fine if the point of the quest is to run a particularly cool monster or a fun challenge for the players, but steps 4 and 5 are where things can get really interesting. During step 3, or immediately after it, the players are going to get access to some new information, and this information is going to redefine their relationship with the quest itself. The criminal they were sent to kill is really a demon hunter, and the quest giver is possessed by a demon who wants to get rid of the hunter. A bandit is being employed by a corrupt local official. A monster is under the control of an evil druid. The new information redefines the player's understanding of the quest. Maybe it alters how they see their quest giver, or how they see the artifact that they're trying to find. The important thing is that this information was not available to them from the start. The new information could also set up a whole new quest to complete in future sessions. For example, in the art gallery game I mentioned earlier, the players succeeded in finding a new patron for their struggling artist friend. However, by listening into certain conversations and asking subtle questions, they were able to ascertain that the art gallery was also being used as a money laundering front for a shady religious group which had ties to one of the players' tragic backstories. The main objective had been accomplished, but the new information set up an exciting new quest with the shady religious organization as a new antagonist. In most cases though, the new information just opens up the final chapter of the current quest, the real ending. The players have encountered the demon hunter, found out about the demonic quest giver, and now go back to the village where they got the quest to face the real villain. It's a conclusion which was always going to happen, but which the players couldn't have predicted from the start. The purpose of the template is to give your players enough information at the outset during step 1 that they become genuinely invested in the campaign. You never leave them in a situation where they don't know what they're doing or why they're trying to do it. At the same time, you withhold just enough information that there's still room to surprise the players and give them an ending they couldn't have predicted. So that is the template that I use when I'm writing my adventures. Obviously, I don't use this every time, but I use it often enough that if you go back through some of my old adventures, the ones I've talked about in videos on this channel, or through my Patreon content, you'll notice that this kind of format crops up quite a bit. But the adventures where I've used this format are actually all very distinct from each other, because sure that the fundamental skeleton of the story might begin the same, but along the way, so much evolves and is added that you don't really recognize it as being the template. Depending on whether it's combat oriented or roleplay focused, depending on what the new information reveals in step 4, it's going to feel like a different quest every time. What's more, as you bring your players in, you're going to find that the quest takes on a life of its own. You might think you know what the template says is going to happen, but your players will do the unexpected. They'll solve problems you didn't even know were problems to begin with. They'll do things in an order you didn't anticipate. And by the end of it, in terms of the player experience, it's going to feel like its own unique quest, not like anything they've done before. Whenever I'm running short of ideas, whenever I'm staring at a blank page and I've got a session to prepare for tonight, I turn to this template. But speaking of ideas, how do you come up with them? Well, I'm glad I pretended you asked, because that's what this next part of the video is about. So how are you going to come up with the actual ideas to plug into each step of the template? Well, I suggest starting from step 3 rather than from the beginning. Step 3, the main challenge, is both the centerpiece and the turning point of the quest. So starting here gives you kind of the flavour and the structure for everything around it. Sit down and imagine your players in a really cool scenario. Don't worry about how they got there or how you justify the elements you see in the scenario. Just envision the coolest, most epic finale you can. For example, the players are in a sewer. The water is rapidly rising and they're fighting giant venomous spiders. Once you've got that image fixed in your head, you're going to work backwards, and now you're going to justify each of the elements you envisioned. In the spider sewer scenario, maybe the players have stumbled on an illegal spider farm underground. The spiders secrete a powerful venom, which can be extracted and diluted to become a powerful psychoactive drug. A criminal gang has been farming this venom and selling it on the streets. It's wreaking havoc. When they realise the players have busted their operation, they open a floodgate. Water begins to pour into the sewer, and the players are now trying to escape the rising water while also fighting these giant venomous spiders. Now let's work back further. Who gave them the quest? Maybe it was the captain of the watch. The captain keeps on getting foiled every time he tries to go after this gang. In fact, he's starting to think that someone close to him might be an informant, so he needs help from outside of the watch. Now, what is the new information that the players get at step 4? Well, maybe after they've escaped the rising waters, they explore more of the gang's hideout and they find letters linking the gang to the town's mayor. The mayor, to whom the captain of the watch reported regularly, was the informant who was feeding information to the gang and taking a cut. That's why the City Watch were powerless to take the gang down. The players take their proof to the captain, and there's a thrilling final scene where they lead the City Watch to storm the mayoral residence. Take this template and try it out with a few different plots. It doesn't take long to put something together, and as you fill in the 5 steps, you're going to get more of your own ideas coming in, and the story will start to evolve and take on a life of its own. If you challenge yourself to write 3 adventures with this template, perhaps one focusing on combat, one on stealth and investigation, and one on roleplay, I guarantee you'll come out with 3 very distinct adventures, and most importantly, your players will experience them as very unique, distinct adventures. I find that this template works pretty well for one-shots and longer stories, but my ideal length is usually about 3 sessions. So session 1 is the first 2 steps, session 2 is 3, maybe 4, and then session 3 is steps 4 and 5 usually. If you do end up using this template, I'd love to hear what you came up with in the comments below this video, because it's amazing how different DMs can take this simple skeleton of a story and build onto it with something that feels completely unique to their world and their DM style. It's just so cool to hear about for me. Thank you for watching. I hope the video was helpful, and many more like this to come.